against that background, how should court approach the criticism under this?
Well, my Lord, we have the conduct of Dr. Schwab in acceding to the presence. Schwab was aware that this man had been interrogated for months by the security branch. Schwab was aware that Colonel Pino was a potential suspect in the case. And yet he allowed intimidating presence of a potential suspect to be present at a post-mortem, which is having the presence of a senior security branch officer at the post-mortem.
What I'm trying to get at is how far should the court go in anti-matching this criticism? If divorced from the context of the system of remember, I'm being asked to be critical of one as a professional medical expert. Right? And we are dealing now with the circumstances under which this professional was done. And I'm saying evidence submission that evidence that you have is this system that was in place and the status of the security branch having any impact in objectivity that one would expect.
No, we submit that that inference.
Simply put, was he not also a victim of the system? Never. To understand why I should find that he was not a victim and could have done more by saying, Pina, Palipa.
Yes, we do. Well, certainly in those days, a lot of people within the state apparatus already spoken about the peculiar position of Constable Berger being, in a sense, a victim of the system at the time. And we're going to return to that line of argument a little later. But in relation to Dr. Schwab, we would say that he is in somewhat different circumstance to Constable Berger. For starters, he was not in the same department. He wasn't in the police. At no point was he reporting to the security branch, at least not officially. At an official level as well, he was not obliged in terms of line of authority to follow any of their instructions. Here was a man who had taken the Hippocratic oath to act in the furtherance of humanity and to always put his patients, technically the deceased, will fall into that class, put those individuals first. So yes, it's arguable that he succumbed to the fear he had of this elite branch known for its brutality. But no, there were other doctors with backbone who stood up to the system. We only have to look at the evidence of Dr. Helmut. And Lord, South Africa's history is replete with examples of individual professionals who did stand up to the system. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule, but there are such examples. And Dr. Schwab failed in his duty to act as a professional in those circumstances. As a court please. And my Lord, there was another person present at the post-mortem the morning of Sunday, 28th September. And that was Dr. E. Slobodman, private pathologist from Cape Town, who actually had been appointed by the Haron family. But curiously, Dr. Slobodman did not provide any oral or written evidence before the first inquest. And it has never been explained why the family's pathologist was on no show following the autopsy. We've tried to look into this matter and we came up empty-handed. And we can only speculate as to whether there may have been exchanges between Colonel Pienaar and the Slobberman that ensured his silence. So, my lord, the forensic pathologists in the reopened inquest detailed multiple shortcomings in relation to the autopsy itself and the postmortem report that followed. And we need to take a look through those shortcomings, starting with the histology report. Dr. Naidoo noted that the histology report was, in his words, a shoddy report. It did not have detailed descriptions of what had been discovered under a microscope, but instead consisted of unhelpful comments, and thus cannot really be useful clinically. Significant shortcomings, as described by Dr. Naidoo, include the following, and I quote: "The histology report was regretfully inadequate, of poor detail, and it fell short, far short, of what should be expected of a histology report. It should describe what is being seen to allow the court as an independent viewer with the expert necessary to arrive at its own conclusion about its findings." In Naidoo's view, Dr. Schwab merely contented himself with a general report of congestion, thereby overlooking the systemic effects of extensive bruising. Dr. Naidoo noted that the crushing of the subcutaneous tissue and muscle caused actual muscle fiber to disintegrate, to degenerate, specifically to come apart, and it is washed away in the circulation, which can result in renal failure. Dr. Malefe also found Schwar's histology report to be unhelpful and potentially misleading, particularly in relation to Schwar's opinion that Haron's myocardial ischemia was precipitated by an emotional situation and small pulmonary embolism present in the lungs. We now turn to the toxicology report. Now, having regard to the evidence of the police, that Haron was provided with multiple tablets, and in particular the scheduled prescription drug Deloxy, Dr. Malefe was absolutely perplexed that the toxicology report came back negative for any drugs. And she had the following to say: "Well, my interpretation of the toxicology is twofold. Either that the analysis was inadequate, and therefore the reporting was inadequate, or that the narrative as given in the inquest report is possibly not true, because the toxicology said completely different to what we expected. Nevertheless, I believe it was Dr. Schwar's responsibility to contact the toxicologist to say, this is the history that I have received. May you please reanalyze the samples and ensure that indeed there are no drugs to be found." And this was an important concern raised by Dr. Malefe. The toxicology report was confirmed as not disclosing any traces of drug medication, and it must cast doubt on the version of the police that he was afforded medication as alleged. And we now turn to Dr. Schwar's findings on the injuries. Despite the details that Schwar recorded in his report on the positioning, ages, and sizes of the bruises, he regarded these in his testimony as not serious. This was a conclusion that Dr. Naidoo could not reconcile, given that there were 573 square centimeters of bruising. According to Naidoo, such a conclusion would also be entirely inconsistent with the literature. Naidoo also criticized Schwar's view that the bruises were not serious in light of his own finding of bruising of the subcutaneous tissue, which is an indication of severe muscle damage. Naidoo concluded that Schwar's answers about pain intensity following the bruises and the rib fracture were disconcertingly disingenuous, non-committal, and evasive. I'll quote further: "Even if bereft of clinical experience, in his medical background, the spectrum and multiplicity of the numerous bruises of substantial size and rib fracture would, for most reasonably medically trained persons, be considered severe in respect of their pain intensity. Now, it also took issue as far as finding that the immobilization of the chest plate was more in regard to breathing and not walking. It described this statement as being economical reality. Naidoo pointed out that fractured rib and soft tissue and intercostal bruising would have been intensely painful, especially on breathing and also with movement of the torso and walking. And both these bodily movements would have been hampered. According to Naidoo, Schwa erred in his estimate of when Haron fractured his rib, the costochondral junction, making it more likely that the injury, that particular injury, was much older than the alleged fall down the stairs. Dr. Malefe, for her part, regarded the post-mortem report as lacking with regard to the description of the bruises. According to her, there should have been flaying of the skin both on the front and the back part of the body to see exactly the extent of the bruising. If the flaying procedure was not done, it's not possible to know how many other subcutaneous bruises were actually on the body and were not reported. So turning to the general shortcomings in the post-mortem report. All things considered, Dr. Naidoo described the post-mortem report as substandard, and that Schwa had failed to adhere to his own standards. For example, Naidoo described the histology report as so inadequate it was not really amount to contribute to a special investigation. Therefore, I do not believe that standard has been met. It should have been an essential portion. It's worth also quoting a little more of what Dr. Malefe had to say in relation to the toxology exercise. It was put to her, and I quote, "I must say, doctor, I'm getting the impression that this post-mortem, this investigation of the death in custody, that at best it was done in quite a rushed and uncaring manner." Dr. Malefe replies, "Lord, I do understand that there are requirements, especially in our society, to perform post-mortems in order to allow the family to bury a certain, for whatever reasons, including religion." My Lord, there she's talking about, in some circumstances, there is a need to conduct a post-mortem quickly so that the body can be buried. However, she says, be that as it may, with deaths in custody, it is generally understood that cannot compromise the quality of the post-mortem report. That unless one has a full understanding of the circumstances of the death, and by Dr. Schwa's own admission, he says, the finding of the post-mortem examination will be determined by the circumstances in which the death occurred. And therefore, the fact that he had to perform the post-mortem on a Sunday cannot possibly be a good enough reason to have a substandard post-mortem examination. She also noted that state pathologists typically attend the scene as quickly as possible, and his inspection could have assisted in arriving at a more accurate determination of the post-mortem interval. However, it seems as if Dr. Schwa did not have any particular interest in making that determination of the post-mortem interval. And the Lord, we submit that all these shortcomings in the post-mortem cannot be explained away by a lack of experience on the part of Dr. Schwa. On the contrary, at that time, he was a leading and well-regarded specialist. Indeed, he was the chief forensic pathologist for Cape Town. And Dr. Naidoo pointed to the relationships that often develop between the police and doctors. And he described that this can result in dual loyalties. Let's turn to Dr. Schwa as a witness before the first inquest. In this expert report, Dr. Naidoo described Dr. Schwa as an evasive witness, not wanting to concede or deny in straight answers. And I actually itemized the points on which Schwa was unacceptably vague. I'll take your lordship through those points. He was vague on expressing an opinion of bruises not of a serious nature. Secondly, being unable to offer an opinion on the probability as to whether the injuries could have been caused by a fall down the stairs. Thirdly, stating that the bruises were multiple, but they did not appear to be extensive. Fourthly, finding that there was no link between the superficial injuries and the deep venous thrombosis. And lastly, that the bruises and or the fractured rib would only cause pain at the time of the trauma or for the first few days, but not much thereafter. But tonight also took issue with the substandard manner in which Schwa dealt with the determination of the nature and age of the injuries in his testimony, noting that he was unwilling to concede their seriousness and their relationship to the possibility of assault. The cause of death could not be determined with the post-mortem examination alone. The post-mortem described multiple and extensive bruises on Haron's body, but did not link them to the cause of death. He also did not provide the cause of death in his testimony, even though the 1970 inquest was held more than 4 months after Haron's death. Schwa testified that he could not determine whether myocardial ischemia that had been claimed was precipitated by Haron's emotional state of a small pulmonary embolism that was present in the lungs. He could not say whether these were the precipitating factors. In fact, Schwa confirmed that no clots were found in the coronary vessels, and therefore he could not attribute the death to myocardial ischemia. Now, if we fast forward to the reopened inquest, and we'll start with the views of Dr. Molefe. In her evidence in chief, Dr. Molefe distinguished between the cause of death and mechanism of death, and stated that in this case, myocardial was a mechanism of death which did not say anything about the cause of death. He noted that Dr. Schwa simply inferred myocardial ischemia, but there was no evidence whatsoever of such a condition. She, however, concluded that the bruises were significant and that they contributed to the cause of death. And she ultimately concluded that the injuries sustained by Haron were the underlying primary cause of death. And in turning to the evidence of Dr. Naidoo, he also ruled out coronary artery disease as a cause of death. And he concluded that possibly that there was a presence of this disease, there was no evidence of its extent. And he noticed the reluctance of Dr. Schwa to rely on it as a cause of death. Naidoo also ruled out myocardial ischemia as a cause of death on the basis that Haron was in a resting or sleeping state when he was found dead. And myocardial ischemia does not occur in a resting state, but in a state of physical exertion, in states of great emotional tension. The heart rate is very high, and the demand for blood exceeds the supply through the narrow coronary artery. So therefore, Dr. Naidoo testified as follows. So what we really have to depend upon in this court case, and allow me to say this, is that the only solid, unquestionable, indisputable evidence that is visual in this case, made visual from the testimony, are the wounds. Over 560 square centimeters of the body had severe bruises. This, my lord, is the primary contributor, primary and main route to the death against the background of coronary artery disease. The main factor would be the wounding, with or without the coronary artery disease being a contributory pre-existing condition. Dr. Naidoo concluded that the most likely cause of death was the cumulative effect of the injuries. In summary, he said, in my opinion, the death was due to a combination of severe symptoms, severe systemic physiological stresses, in particular the crush injury syndrome precipitated by the complications of blunt soft tissue injury, pre-existing coronary artery disease. He was of the view that these injuries would only be attributable to the assaults. According to Dr. Naidoo, the systemic effects of extensive bruising could include acute kidney failure as a result of the damage to the kidneys. And despite the lack of a proper histology examination by Dr. Schwar, kidney damage or renal failure could not be excluded as a possible cause of death. He described it as unavoidable to conclude that Schwar had attempted to minimize the impact of the harm on Imam. In order to, it's worth quoting Dr. Naidoo's final words in his testimony, in his examination, in his evidence in chief. And this best encapsulates what caused Imam's death. The following was put to Dr. Naidoo. Now, Dr. Naidoo, my final question to you is, but for the assault and abuse that was subjected to Imam Haron during the period of his detention, would he have died at that time? Dr. Naidoo replies, I believe he would definitely have not died at the time that he did, because I believe he could have survived for an indefinite period of time, perhaps even years, if there was actually coronary artery disease, which I will say a lot of us already have. Here, at this existing moment in time, some degree of coronary artery disease. So yes, I believe he would have survived, possibly indefinitely. Essentially, what the doctor was saying is that, but for the assaults, but for the denial of medical attention, he could have lived to a ripe old age. Lord, we now turn to the next head arguments, which is the cover. Lord, the police investigation was not only substandard, it was specifically aimed at concealing what happened. We submit that the police investigation carried out by the security branch itself was in effect a cover-up. In the laws, we would submit that it's common cause that there are certain basic minimum standards to be adhered to in the investigation of death from custody. And these include the following. One, the investigation should not be conducted by the unit whose members are themselves suspected of being involved or connected to the death. Secondly, investigators must commence an investigation with an open mind as to cause of death and explore all leads and all possible theories. Thirdly, there must be a thorough crime scene and incident investigation. Fourthly, there should be a full recording of the death scene and the taking of photographs. Fifthly, photos of the deceased should be taken, including photos of individual injuries, under the supervision of the pathologist at the autopsy. Sixthly, all available evidence must be collected and presented to the inquest court. 7, all potential witnesses must be interviewed and the affidavits recorded, and they must be available in court. And lastly, all material evidence must be properly marked and preserved so the subsequent chain of evidence can be demonstrated. My Lord, in relation to the investigation of the death of Imam Haron, none of these minimum standards were complied. Firstly, we had the security branch investigating themselves. So the investigation was anything but impartial. At the time the investigation commenced, it was clear that the security branch simply wished to demonstrate that Haron died of natural causes, entirely unconnected to his treatment of detention. And there's no evidence whatsoever that an investigating officer was appointed to prepare a docket for the inquest. The security branch took control of the investigation, with the shots being called by Colonel Pino, head of the branch in Cape Town. the Criminal Investigation Division at Cape Town, CID headquarters, they should have been seized with the investigation, but they were either shut out or they knew not to interfere with the security branch. And Colonel Peterson of the DPCI, who was the investigating officer for the reopened inquest, he agreed in his testimony that the investigation was kept in-house by the security branch. And since it was branch members who were interrogating Haron and were specifically responsible for him, and they were, accordingly, the potential suspects, their statement should have been taken, at least at that time, by members of the detective branch. However, all statements, and for the first inquest, were taken by the security branch themselves and attested by them as well. For example, Milan Revier's affidavits were commissioned by Enoch. When asked about this during his testimony, Colonel Peterson commented that this definitely gave rise to suspicion. Enoch also commissioned the affidavits of Geldenhuis, and Geldenhuis commissioned Pienaar's affidavit. You can't get more in-house than this. We also know that Colonel Pienaar took the affidavit of Constable Berger. According to the evidence of Berger, he was called to Pienaar's office, he took the statements, and according to Berger, Pienaar had decided what was to go into that statement. We'll recall Berger's evidence on that score. He said whatever he thought did not matter. In his words, it cut no ice. And we submit that it can be reasonably assumed that if it was Colonel Pienaar taking Berger's statement, and the probabilities are pretty high, but he also took the statements, reported the statements of the other security branch officers, particularly the interrogators. And we would submit that this was done to ensure a consistent narrative. And at least two members of the branch involved in the investigation, Sergeant Andries van Beek, Major Kotzer, did not make statements and did not testify. Needless to say, with their evidence, a fuller picture could have emerged. In turning to the crime scene investigation, we suggest, my lord, that the cover-up started shortly after the death of the Imam. It started around 10h, 15 hours, the morning of 27 September 1969, when Haron was found dead. Once Colonel Pienaar was informed, the security branch took full control. District Surgeon Crossu certified Haron dead, but provided no time of death. Who commissioned Crossu's affidavit? It was Colonel Pienaar himself. Then we have the presence of non-investigators at the scene. The scene was not cordoned off, resulting in no one being allowed there except the forensic investigators. However, we know from the testimony of Berger that once Haron was discovered dead, in his words, the troops came in and the cell was something of a scrum. Those on the scene included the security branch who were present in the cell prior to any forensic investigation proceeding. And Colonel Peterson also agreed that the cell should have been treated as a crime scene. Typically, according to him, the duty of the first commissioned duty officer at the scene was to cordon off and secure the scene for forensic investigation. There was no evidence that this was done. Clearly, this opened the door to possible disturbing or contamination of the death scene. Then turning to the forensic investigation itself. Aside from a photo of the body, no photos were taken of the whole cell. My lord, typically at a crime or death scene, there should be multiple photographs of the deceased himself. Then there should be wider shots of the cell, locating the deceased within the bigger context. Malefa testified that the lack of photographic evidence hampered the investigation and confirmed that photographs of the body and the whole scene are common practice in crime and death scene investigation. No fingerprints were taken in the cell, and no examination was done for traces of blood or bodily fluid. Nobody prepared a report, a description of the death scene.